What's up, everybody? This is Ninja Burrito, and today we're talking about Halo. Yes, that's right, Halo, the new Halo remake. So, if you didn't know, Halo Studios is making Halo 1 available on PlayStation and giving it a fresh coat of paint with Unreal Engine 5 in the mix. And that's the topic of discussion, and it's actually caused a bit of stirring. So, if we go and look at the Halo remake video, in case you're not aware, there's some changes to the game. We've got an advertisement here, so give me a second. Some of us don't pay for YouTube Premium, and it shows. It shows. Those of you who have to deal with ads, I get it, man. I get it. Anyways, what I want to show briefly. So this is the new Halo. See if you're familiar with Halo, which most people are in the gaming world. This is it, right? So this is Halo. Do we have a clip of it anywhere? There's a particular thing I want to showcase. It's not in this one? Question mark? Let's look. Hold on. So this is Chief storming the beach, right? He sticks that guy. Yada yada. Okay, so this is the remake anyways, but that's not what is causing people to be upset. They're upset because there's sprint in the Halo remake. Okay? There's sprint. You can sprint. And it will show it here in this clip in just a second. I will let that play in the background for you. So, the reason why this is a problem, right, is because Halo, when it originally came out, did not have sprint. And the Halo remake is trying to hold on to, there's your sprint. So he doesn't move much faster, but he moves a little bit faster. So it's got that Halo Infinite sprint, right, where it's like pseudo sprint. It's like you're not really like full blown sprinting. You're just kind of picking up the pace by like 10-15%, something like that. Which everyone generally agrees in Halo Infinite was kind of like the sweet spot for like, okay, sprint in Halo is here to stay, and some people don't like it, but this is like it fits well enough that if you don't like it, it's okay level of speed, right? Because in Halo, it's a slower paced on the movement. Even though Halo has some crazy movement tech, believe me, the fact that you don't have sprint means that your movement is committal, right? So in multiplayer is usually where we talk about this, not single player. People don't really traditionally care about sprint in single player, but in multiplayer is where people complain because they feel like people don't have to commit to their movement. So when you're fighting someone, they can slip away from you while you're shooting them, and you feel like that's cheap because like, hey, I really had that kill. You got away with a sliver of health, and you really wouldn't have been able to do that if you couldn't sprint. And the level design in Halo really feels like you were they get away with it in times where they shouldn't, is kind of the general thought process. So it's that lack of commitment to the gunfight, to the movement, to making sure you go the right way at the right time in the right spot. And so because of that, we've had to use a lot of other movement tech, a lot of Xbox specific even movement over the years by dealing with like enemy auto aim and how to avoid that, and peeking around corners, and crouching at the right time, and crouch jumping and moving your hitbox, and blah 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 blah. So there's a lot of movement tech in Halo from the beginning. But now people are upset at this remake because they're adding in sprint and they're making some other modernization changes, and that scares people because what do people hate? Old people hate change. Okay, that's the quote. Old people hate change, but not all old people. Some old people actually have some constructive conversations to add about this, and I think that it actually lands pretty well on the discussion of should a new Halo have sprint. Will this remake, which by the way is a pre-release build, it's a work in progress. They have a lot of work left to do, so this is just like a thin vertical slice. This level isn't final, these weapons aren't final, these designs aren't final, but there are a lot of things that we probably will see in the final product, right? Like there's still room for tweaking, but a lot of it probably isn't going to be totally redesigned. that doesn't mean they can't change things, and we're going to talk about that. So that's kind of the gameplay. Let's get into the social media by looking at old Halo Combat Evolved developers and their opinions. We're going to start with Jamie Griesemer. Hopefully I said his last name correctly. And he actually did this really, really cool long discussion. I mean, look at all these posts about really hashing out from a game developer perspective, like a seasoned veteran. If you're going to put sprint into a game, why are you putting sprint into the game? Does it fit well for the game? This is a purely non-financial based, just master of your craft style of thinking. Like, if I'm going to put something in my game, why am I doing that? It's like fundamental game design, right? But of course, there are more opinions than just game design on these decisions. So for him, he says it's a trade-off. If you have sprint, there's positives and negatives. What is the difference between putting it in versus not putting it in? Sounds like a fundamental question, and I'm not going to break down the whole conversation, but I did want to highlight his conclusion, right? So after all these posts, all these comments, and there's even more, right? He says, in conclusion, as long as you have the time and resources to properly minimize the negative consequences and you account for any sort of balance tuning issues, especially in combat and with pacing, then adding sprint is probably a net positive trade-off, right? Which is good to hear. It's like, okay, so look, you're trying to attract new players. New players expect sprint. I can speak from this personally. My father just tried Halo for the very first time. I think last month. He got the Master Chief Collection just out of boredom. And I'm a huge Halo guy, but he's never been. And he was just complaining to me. He's like, why am I so slow? This is boring. I can't sprint. And for me, like, that sounds like sacrilegious. Like, what do you, how are you going to say Halo CE is boring? But the mindset has changed. Modern gamers, people buying games today who did not play Halo long ago, and this is just one brief example, but there's hundreds of others, they expect sprint. And as someone who has played a lot of Halo CE, I mean, I've got 100% achievements on MCC. I played Halo CE when it came out. You know, like I have plenty of experience with that game. I can tell you there's plenty of times where sprint actually would be a benefit. There's plenty of pretty large maps where you go way out of the way, you go way the wrong way, you get turned around. Sprint would be a good way to help resolve those situations where you're like, all right, I'm not trekking back for like 5 minutes. I can sprint and make it feel a little bit quicker. Like, there are places where it actually would be a benefit in Halo CE. However, you do have to consider all the places where it would not be a benefit. Like, okay, well, this might break encounters, or it might break pacing, or it might break balance, right? It might ruin some immersion by sprinting down corridors that normally are designed for you to go, oh, hold on, slow down a second, right? Slow down a second. This is crazy. Yo, this is cool. And now you're just sprinting through. So I think that you do have to take the time to remove the ability to sprint through key areas, which is a manual developer, like, hands-on work to make sure that that happens. And even if you do that, some players will inevitably complain. They're like, oh yeah, they keep taking away sprint at certain parts, but it's not even a cutscene. Like, it's just a hard balance to strike because Halo's an old game. It's a product of its time where sprint wasn't really a thing. And back in those days, you either had your like glidey ice FPS shooters where you're like Quake, where you're just like zooming along, like boom, 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 bouncing off walls and arena shooters. And then you have like Halo, where you're like, it's more grounded, right? Sprint wasn't this universal mechanic. You were just either faster or slower, and Halo was on the slower side as far as movement. And so now trying to reappropriate that for a modern audience is not an easy task. They can make it very modern and successful, and they are going to do that. They're emulating it off of the more modern Halos, which Halo Infinite was successful. Remember, guys, Halo Infinite wasn't criticized for having sprint. It wasn't criticized for having bad level design or gameplay. It was praised for that when it came out. You know where it got criticized was its lack of content. Not having enough content is why people don't like Halo Infinite. It took too long to get content, and it had too many bugs. But that doesn't mean that people hated sprint in it. They didn't hate sprint. They didn't hate the mechanics. They didn't hate the grappling hook. Like, sure, some of us will say, well, I prefer the older Halo game design, but they didn't hate or even dislike Halo Infinite for those things. Now that some time has passed, people are forgetting that, and they're just kind of bunching Halo Infinite in with Halo 5 and Halo 4, where in Halo 4 we really did hate sprint. We really did hate the Call of Duty feeling of Halo 4. And in Halo 5, it was very jarring for players, so a lot of players just said no. But those who invested in Halo 5 actually really appreciate the sprint, really appreciate the movement tech. It just is very not old school Halo. It's a new flavor of Halo, which is good, but again, it doesn't feel good to lose what we had before because what we had before was so good. So there's nothing wrong with Halo 5's implementation of sprint and movement mechanics. It's very high end, very high competitive, and very fun. But what doesn't feel good is the natural trade-off is that we do lose what we had before, and what we had before, we want what we had before. So nothing wrong with Halo 5's movement. It's really incredibly like high bar game design, pulling off Halo 5's movement in a multiplayer title that feels that good and with that high of a skill cap. But we lose what we had before, and we love what we had before. That's just all there is to it. So that's the problem with Halo 5's movement, with sprint and everything. And when it first came out, some of the Spartan abilities that are movement related, like the shoulder tackle, they were overtuned. Like they would move faster than your radar could pick them up and just hit you in the back and one shot kill you. That was super annoying when it first came out. But then Halo Infinite fixed all of these things, guys. It fixed all of these things, and now we're taking that formula, sorry, and applying it to Halo CE. I gotta get a drink. Hold on. But the problem with that is that Halo CE is an old game. And people in 2025 do not know the difference between a remake and a remaster. They don't know the difference, okay? And this doesn't apply to Jamie. Jamie knows what this is. This guy's a good game dev. He knows what he's talking about. He might be strong and opinionated, and very vocal about it, and there's nothing wrong with that either, But don't let that allow him to come across as not knowing what he's talking about, because he absolutely does know what he's talking about. This is a really, really great thread. I recommend checking this out if you have any interest in this type of discussion around Halo and Sprint, because you will learn a lot reading a lot of these comments. Whether you like Sprint, whether you accept that just, hey, listen, man, people are expecting this, and whether you agree with it or not. Like some people will say, I don't care if people expect Sprint. We shouldn't kowtow to what they expect. We should just make something great. That's the artist. That's the game designer opinion. And I agree with that, honestly. But there's also a second side of this of marketing and making money. And of course, that argument will probably come in and be like, bro, if our point of making Halo CE is to learn how to develop in UE5 in order to bring this to PlayStation, and in order to make our future Halo games easier to develop and hire for, so that we can attract new players, right? That's going to be the key term. If we're trying to attract new players, what do new players expect? That's like trying to meet the needs of your market. And if they expect Sprint in 2025, you're going to want to put in Sprint, regardless of if it's a good fit for the game or not. Someone's going to push for that. And so I would disagree with putting it in for that reason, because that's how you make a bad game. You just shoehorn mechanics in because people expect it. But at the same time, not putting it in is going to turn off a lot of people from your game. So that's the trade-off, dude. How do you balance both sides? And so 343 Halo Studios, now Halo Studios, they decided to make it a toggleable option. Now, I don't know where the thread is, because there is a great thread about how making it an option is poor design, and we'll talk about that. I can't find the thread right now. Maybe it's a Jamie comment as well. I'm not sure. But the argument is that Halo Studios makes it an option so that if you don't want sprint in your game, you can turn it off. That's like the special treatment for us old heads that care about that stuff. They're like, all right, you special snowflakes that get upset about it, don't worry, we care about it too. You can turn it off, which is great. That's a great option. But it also means that it feels like your mechanic is not a puzzle piece that you intentionally designed for your game, right? It's either necessary and we expect you to have sprint or not. And Halo CE originally is designed, and the levels are designed for you not to have sprint, and all of a sudden you have it, right? So it's one of those things where it's a unique situation, I guess, because it's Halo and because the community is so divided. That's why it's an option, and that's why it makes sense to provide an option. But from a game design perspective, that is typically bad game design. This is like a community specific situation. And so that's why it's just so interesting. You know, we have other other situations going on with this as well. There's a section in the level that Jamie put in some rocks to prevent you from bringing the Warthog further into the level. The Warthog is the car that you can drive. And if we fast forward here, this is the car, and this is the section right here where he made it so that you can't drive the Warthog up this hill originally, and now you can. This is not a finished product. This is not final. So I suspect they will change this, because this is not an area where you're supposed to drive the Warthog, right? Because the hunters, you're supposed to fight them on foot so that they feel scary and deadly, and being able to bring a vehicle in there changes that encounter quite a bit. I will say, when I did Lasso, I did find a way to bring the Warthog up this hill anyways, just so you know. I absolutely got it up there. So it's kind of a moot point if you are like trying to break the game, but it stands to point that the level design was designed a certain way to maintain the integrity of the gameplay and the battle encounters, right? And so that's an important point too. Doesn't really change it that much if you can bring a vehicle into a place where you normally couldn't bring it before. The other thing too is Marcus Leto is one of the old level designers, I think, or at least a game dev on CE, maybe not a level designer. I don't fully remember. And he actually had some positivity for the remake. He said, "Hey, I love where this is going. It looks and feels genuine. It's gorgeous. I wish we could have made it look like that back in 2001. It warms my heart." He's like an old dad seeing his kid again. He's like, my kid's growing up. He's changing a little bit, but I don't feel the need to control it. You know what I mean? If it changes a little bit, hey, it's still seeing Master Chief look good, seeing my old work loved in such a way that they're doing this to it, that warms my heart. And I think that's such a great take, honestly. He's, again, these old Halo devs, they don't all hate change, you know what I mean? And it's not like the ones that hate change don't even really hate change. They just think change should make sense. You know what I mean? It should make sense. And that's why I like to highlight Jamie's conclusion that it's probably a net positive as long as you have some attentiveness to detail, right? So it's yeah. So what I think we can draw conclusions from all of this is that I think that Sprint needs that attentiveness to detail. I think that there should be sections of the game where you're not allowed to just sprint through. I think you manually have to make that change to maintain the integrity of the atmosphere and the storytelling, right? Because Cortana will be talking to you while you're going down a long hallway, right? They'll extend the hallway's length to make it so that conversation still fits. I think that you have to change some of the level design a little bit if you're going to add sprint in, okay? You either change the level design or you intentionally remove the ability to sprint through certain sections. Here's the other part. You've got to change the encounters. If you have sprint and you didn't have sprint before, your battles are going to be changed, so you might need to space enemies out a little bit more, and you might need to add more enemies in. It can't be a one-to-one because you're going to inevitably break some of those encounters, and the only way to fix it is to pay attention and QA test your game so that you know what isn't working anymore compared to how it worked before, and then supplement it with whatever you need to make it work. Here's the thing. Like I was saying earlier, people don't know the difference between a remaster and a remake. A remaster maintains the integrity of the original product. Let's look at Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII came out on the PlayStation 1. It's got very antiquated PlayStation 1 graphics. For the time, it was the cutting edge graphics, so this is not an insult, but it's antiquated now, right? And it has like that old PlayStation 1 music, and it's got old PlayStation 1 encounters and storytelling. When they remade the game, they do the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is almost universally beloved and quite impressive, right? They've changed a lot. They've changed the story a tiny bit. They've changed all of the level design is completely different. It's 3D now. It's like open worldish. The battle encounters are different, right? You're not fighting the same enemies. You're not fighting them in the same places. Everything about that game is different for the purpose of remaking the game. So a remake is allowed to change all of the elements of the game, all of them. A remaster maintains all of the elements, but upscales it, sometimes makes it look better, adds in new graphical fidelity, new graphic options, support for modern systems. That's a remaster. Hey, it's the exact same game you remember, except now it supports widescreen. Now it supports 4K. Now it does this. Now it does that. It's going to look good and feel good on a modern system instead of feeling like a DOS game, right? If you've ever played a Microsoft DOS game on a modern computer and you have to launch DOSBox or whatever that software is to emulate DOS, right? You know, it doesn't feel very good, and the resolution sometimes is distorted and looks all smudgy. You know what I mean? A remaster solves those types of problems. A remake doesn't just inherently removes those problems by recreating the product from the ground up. So this is technically being marketed as a remake, right? But they're not actually remaking everything. They're taking what was there before and putting a new coat of paint on it like they did with Anniversary Edition, but then also giving themselves permission to make mechanical changes. So adding shields instead of health, adding ADS, adding sprint. But they're really not, so far as we can tell, changing level design or encounters. They did technically change level design by removing those rocks we talked about so that you can drive up the hill. That is an example of level design, but they didn't change the encounter at the top of the hill at all. So it feels like misguided level design. But again, it's a thin vertical slice. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just is there to show what it could be later. What the graphics could be in the gameplay and how it could feel like Halo and how this is going to be the what we want the final product to emulate, but not necessarily be a one-to-one, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. That's the discussion about game design and about the decisions that all need to be carefully curated, carefully decided upon to make a good Halo remake, right? So that's really where we're at with this. I think that the remake looks good, feels good, but I don't know that they are necessarily considering making all the manual developer changes that need to be made for these things to be successful. Adding in the new weapons in the sandbox as well is a big one. They're adding 9 new weapons. Does that mean that they need to add in new enemies? Does that mean that they need to change the encounters? Like, for example, an encounter that you used to have, like an assault rifle and a pistol to deal with, maybe now you can have an energy sword and just delete it on all difficulties. That's not going to be very fun. If the energy sword is implemented in a section where it just deletes the encounter, you need to remove the energy sword from that encounter, right? That's game integrity that we want to maintain. And so they are going to have to carefully curate all of these decisions. But it's okay. They have time to do that. We shouldn't really criticize them for not having it done already when this is just like a pre-release, this is like a marketing trailer, a playable trailer, basically. Like, hey, you can play the game a little bit. If they don't make a lot of changes to this level, by the time it comes out, I'll be disappointed. You know what I mean? I think that this early version is not complete. I think they need to fine tune the encounters, fine tune weapon availability, fine tune spacing of encounters, fine tune where you can drive vehicles and where you can't. All that stuff needs to be worked on at the moment. And so if they don't do that, then I think we can have reason to complain. So that's my takeaway. I think that, that's how you should go about a remake. This is kind of a pseudo remake, pseudo not, which feels weird. I think if you're going to remake the game, You know what I mean? Like actually remake the game, in my opinion. Uh, Keeping the music, but maybe like a modern version of it. Remaster the music or whatever. The level design is so good that I'm not advocating that it all has to change, but I am saying if you're going to change the mechanics that the player has access to, you probably need to expand on the level design to account for that. And so it would be simpler not to add sprint, but if your marketing team, if your finance team is saying you need to have sprint in this game or it won't sell based on all this data and metrics of every other shooter that has to have sprint or it doesn't sell, then okay, that might just be the reality. You have to have sprint. And if you have to have sprint, you're going to have to do the hard work to actually implement sprint and not just throw the mechanic in the game. You need to put the mechanic in the game, and then you need to balance the game to make it a game that supports having sprint instead of one that just feels bad because it's just haphazardly thrown in there. Even if it's not that much of a movement speed buff. Remember, they've already tuned it down sprint in Halo so that it's almost basically not sprint, right? But even so, you still need to balance it. And that is a lot of hours of work, dude. That is literally a lot of hours of sitting at your desk, going through sections, play testing, and be like, nah, we can't let them sprint through this. Someone's got to put their foot down and be like, you can't sprint in this area. You just can't. And in other places, being like, this hallway, we want them to be able to sprint in this fight, but honestly, it breaks this fight pretty hard. We're going to need to extend this hallway and make it longer, or add more cover, or do something. Add more enemies so you can't just sprint past or you die, right? Like, what you're going to have to make those game design decisions to make the game fun, fair, and maintain that level of Halo excitement, right? That's my opinion. That is my take on the Halo remake. Sorry, this was a long one, and I know I don't normally talk about Halo on this channel. This is not my Halo channel. This is my Ninja Gaiden channel. But I have been playing around with the idea of maybe merging these communities a little bit. So we'll see. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you're just totally uninterested in this type of content or if you find it interesting. I personally find it interesting to talk about game design, talk about just video games in general. So let me know. But until we meet again, blippity bloppity bloopity, this is Ninja Burrito, and I'll blippity bloppity you next time. See ya.